So, Spotify versus Apple Music. They're both giants within music streaming, but which one is better? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at in today's video to help you decide which is the better streaming service to use. For those of you who want a straight upfront conclusion, I'm just going to say that as of the date of recording, which is the 10th of February 2024, Spotify is probably the way to go for 70% of people out there. However, the margin by which Spotify wins is actually smaller than you might think, and I'll explain why that's the case, in addition to why I personally use Apple Music as my streaming service of choice throughout this video. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So in order to understand the differences between Apple Music and Spotify, we first need to understand their approaches to music streaming. Straight off the bat, when you go into Apple Music, the first thing you'll notice is just how album and artist oriented it is, in the sense that if I go into my Listen Now tab at the bottom here, it's recommending me lists of stations by artist or artist album. And for a lot of these albums, there'll also be a little description which lets you better understand the context in which the songs were written, which I personally feel helps connect you with the artist a bit more. You can see that if I also go into the artist page, we have their top songs, a bunch of essentials playlists, along with their albums and singles nicely organized. On the other hand, if we go into Spotify, yes, we do have a few recommended albums, and if we go onto an artist page, you can view their top 5 songs and their equivalent of an essentials playlist, but the attention to detail just isn't quite the same. You don't get the descriptions in each album if you're an aficionado, and you can see on the homepage as well that the focus is generally more so on mixed playlists than albums. And these are usually playlists by genre, mood, or even time period, which Apple Music tries to mimic somewhat with its 4 mixed playlists, but it's not nearly to the same degree as Spotify. Also, you'll tend to find that the recommendations by Spotify are, for the most part, algorithmically generated, which is something I'll touch on later on in this video. However, Apple Music also has a big emphasis on human curation. So if you go into this radio tab here at the bottom, you'll see that we have a bunch of radio stations and different shows that are run by real people. Like even Elton John has his own show, so you can see what music he's currently listening to. And again, it's just one of those things that makes Apple Music feel like a more premium service. Like the fact that you have all of these stations hosted by actual artists themselves like Elton John or Charlie Sloth or even Anderson .Paak. It's just incredible, and yeah, there's definitely no way Apple makes a profit off of this service with the amount that they're offering here. So, Apple Music, album and artist oriented, and Spotify, mixed playlists. Which one is better? Well, if all you want is to be exposed to new songs every week, then Spotify is probably the way to go. However, if you're like me and you prefer listening to your music by albums so you can really get to know the artist, then Apple Music might be the way to go. It just feels more like a sort of digital CD, a bit like how iTunes was back in the day. And if I do want a mixed playlist, well, I've got my own personal playlist that I've created, along with the various different radio stations that Apple Music has to offer. Another key difference between the two services is in the design. So Apple Music takes a pretty minimalist approach. It's very aesthetic. So for example, in iOS 16, Apple Music introduced this live album art, which looks incredibly nice. A lot of songs also have these live lyrics that, in theory, are meant to match up with what the artist is singing, but admittedly that doesn't always happen perfectly. You also get a light and dark mode on Apple Music, whereas with Spotify, you're just stuck with a dark mode. And on the whole, I just feel like Spotify is constantly cramming me with too much content. Like, we've recently had audiobooks and podcasts added to the platform, and if you are somebody who prefers to have all of their audio content in one platform, then I suppose that's great. But for me personally, I prefer to listen to my podcasts, audiobooks, and music in separate apps. And when you consider the way that you can swipe between different songs, and recently we've had this new music discovery feature, it gives Spotify a very Instagram/TikTok-esque kind of vibe, which I'm personally not a fan of because it all just feels like a lot of clutter. But then again, it is purely a matter of preference, and I think that if you can get past the design, it's no real biggie. And of course you might question how much time you're going to spend in the actual music app itself. Also, even though Apple Music's design is more visually appealing, there are times where Spotify just feels a bit more functional. Like if I want to go to a song's artist, I can simply press on their name, or if I want to get the lyrics, I can just scroll down and easily see them all. Whereas on Apple Music, you have an extra step where you have to tap in the center and then hit the artist's name, or tap this lyric button at the bottom. And even then, you can only highlight the lyric that's currently being sung. However, one overlooked benefit that Apple Music's UI does have at least on iOS devices, is access to system controls. So if you want to adjust the volume, you can do that right from the app. Or if you want to favorite a song, you can do that right from the home screen or the dynamic island, which is just a nice touch that unfortunately I don't think Apple Music is going to let Spotify use in the near future. And that moves us onto the niceties that each of the services offer. So one thing I really like about Spotify is this concert discovery feature. So anytime you're listening to a song, you can scroll down to the bottom to see if that artist has any upcoming shows near your area. And with Apple Music, you can sort of do a similar thing, but through the Shazam app. So if you open Shazam, you can technically view concerts for different artists, but why this feature hasn't been integrated properly into the Apple Music app itself is beyond me, and it is quite frustrating, especially given Apple Music's artist-oriented approach. Also, with Spotify, you can access it on pretty much any device, whether that's an iOS or Android phone, a Windows PC or a Mac, a PlayStation, an Xbox, your desktop at work, and you can even hand off the music you're playing on one device to any other device that's signed into your Spotify account and control the music that you're playing from other devices. Whereas with Apple Music, the most I can do is AirPlay from my iPhone or my iPad straight to my Mac. And if I want to play something on my iPhone or my iPad, I get one of these annoying pop-ups telling me to upgrade to the family plan. So yeah, it's pretty poor from the company that is supposed to be the master of handoffs and ecosystems. However, Apple Music then strikes back because you can actually view the recordings of a lot of concerts directly in the app through Apple Music Live. So for example, we've got Brent Faiyaz at the O2 here. So Apple Music actually sent somebody down to record this concert live, and you can even watch music videos straight in the app as well. We've also got this Apple Music Sing feature, which lets you turn down the volume of the vocals for a lot of songs. It was initially meant for karaoke, so you could theoretically sing along to a song, but I often use it as a way to listen to the instrumental tunes for a lot of tracks. And a big flex that Apple Music has over Spotify is its support for Dolby Atmos and spatial audio. So essentially, if you own a pair of AirPods or Beats or any other Dolby Atmos compatible headphones, you get this 3D-like immersive sound experience, which I used to think was just a gimmick when it first came out. But over the years, I've really come to appreciate how good songs sound in this format. And in fact, whenever I do listen to music on Spotify, I can immediately tell how two-dimensional the music sounds. Again, it is somewhat subjective, and a lot of the time, how good a track sounds in Dolby Atmos depends on how well the artist and their label mix it. And in fact, there are some cases where a song in Dolby Atmos can actually sound worse than its stereo counterpart. That said, on the whole, it's a big reason why I personally use Apple Music, and Spotify is supposedly trying to work on introducing this at some point as well, but for now, Apple Music is the king when it comes to audio quality. Okay, so now that we've had a chance to look at the design and the features for each service, let's address the elephant in the room, which arguably is the thing that a lot of us care the most about when choosing a music streaming service, and that's the algorithm. I think it's safe to say that Apple Music historically has had a pretty terrible algorithm when it comes to recommending new artists and songs. And for a long time, it was a big reason why people gravitated towards Spotify over Apple Music. And in 2024, if you are looking for a clear winner here, I still think that Spotify does have the better algorithm. However, Apple Music's algorithm has improved substantially over the past 6 to 12 months when it comes to recommendations and discovery. For example, we've got a new station called the Discovery Station, which recommends songs and artists that you've never played before. And to be honest, I've been pretty happy with how these recommendations have turned out. Obviously, music recommendations are a subjective thing, so what sounds incredible to me might sound absolutely egregious to you. But for the most part, I've been pretty happy with the recommendations I've gotten from Apple Music. On top of that, Apple Music now has this list at the bottom of each playlist that lets you preview 5 songs based on what's in your playlist. It's basically inspired heavily by Spotify, although annoyingly it only lets you preview the song. And I'm going to be totally honest, the algorithm here is a lot weaker than Spotify's. Okay, so this is actually a really good example. So I've got a playlist of different Punjabi songs right here, and in my suggested songs at the bottom, I've just got a bunch of recommendations like Travis Scott, D Block Europe, AJ Tracey, which is all sort of UK and US rap as opposed to Punjabi music. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love these artists and these songs, but it doesn't quite fit the vibe for this playlist. Now, I'm sure this will improve over time, and if the rumors about Apple introducing AI features to iOS 18 this June are true, then Apple Music's discovery capabilities could get a big boost by AI. But for the time being, Spotify is still the king here. And I'd hazard to guess that's probably the number one reason why most people stick with Spotify over Apple Music. Yes, Apple Music does have a bunch of really cool features that make it stand apart from Spotify, but there's an argument to be made that if it can't get the one thing that people care the most about right, which is the algorithm, then arguably it can never be as good as Spotify. Another thing I really like about Spotify are its social features. Obviously, Spotify Wrapped is a big one, where at the end of each year it shows you a list of your favorite songs and artists for that year, which you can post across different social media pages. And Apple Music has a similar thing with Apple Music Replay. But the process for accessing it is quite strange because you have to press on an icon that sends you to a website outside of the app, which you then have to log in through your Apple ID in order to access it. So it's just a weird faff from Apple, which really needs improving. Also, Spotify easily lets you form collaborative playlists with other people. Now, yes, Apple Music did introduce this in their most recent iOS 17 update, but Spotify still wins out because of network effects. And what I mean by that is that most people out there with a music streaming subscription probably use Spotify. And so if you've just met somebody for the first time, chances are you're not going to be able to form a collaborative playlist with them on Apple Music if they're using Spotify. So unless you know for a fact that all of your friends currently use Apple Music, then Spotify is probably the winner here when it comes to social features. But yeah, to conclude, if I could only use one of these music streaming services, I'd go with Apple Music personally, simply because I prefer the minimal UI and the album focused approach, along with spatial audio, which is a big seller for me. However, I feel like the majority of people out there probably aren't going to care about those features. And if what you're more focused on is discovery, then Spotify is probably a better fit. Again, Apple Music's algorithm is great, but Spotify's is just a level better. But what I will say is that over the past year, Apple Music has made a lot of improvements when it comes to correcting its shortcomings, and I've made a list of them here. So we've had the addition of the Discovery playlist, the ability to favorite songs, the favorites playlist, collaborative playlists, share playlists whilst driving, and there's now even an option where you can toggle on and off your listening history when you're in a particular focus mode. And so from this, it's pretty clear that Apple is trying to play catch up with Spotify, and I'd argue that they're getting pretty close because once they've nailed the algorithm bit, I think that is going to be a very close battle between the two streaming services. But of course, let me know in the comments down below which streaming service you use personally and why. And as always, if you found this video useful, leave us a like. And if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, hit subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one.